Leonardo da Vinci, the archetypal artist. I mean, when people hear I teach art history, he's one that people sometimes mention. Like, you're an art historian, you better know the Mona Lisa. It's like a rule. But yes, he's the archetypal Renaissance man. He was smart, he was quirky, he was extremely artistic, considered a genius because he was a man of all things, really. He was fascinated with science, anatomy, and certainly art, and he was inventive. He imagined things that didn't even occur until the 1900s. So he bewilders a lot of people. I mean, people have suggested that he was some sort of time traveler, all kinds of things. There's oh, so many hypotheses about hypotheses about uh, Leonardo da Vinci. So, so yes, he is a really intriguing, interesting artist. Now, these angels are actually Raphael's angels. Raphael, of course, is also one of the great masters of the Renaissance. Raphael, Leonardo, Titian, Giorgione, these are very important Renaissance artists. They're kind of key Renaissance artists. And this image, these angels, when I first started studying art history, I thought this was a painting, just this. No, 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 no. This is a detail. It's part of a painting, and yet it's this detail that shows up on postcards, on purses, on calendars, um, mugs, everything. So yes, it's a very iconic image. And in similar ways, so is Leonardo. Leonardo, and we often call him Leonardo, we don't call him Da Vinci because Leonardo means of Vinci. So most of the time you'll see it written as Leonardo, but every once in a while Da Vinci, but again, Leonardo is perhaps more accurate. So he was raised in his father's home in Vinci by his paternal grandfather, Ser Antonio. His childhood, in his childhood, he was noted for his early talents of drawing and his taste for history, mathematics, scientific creations, inventions. He just was absolutely intriguing. And early on, people noted it, and he was also beautiful. That didn't hurt. So in any case, around 1470, Leonardo's father apprenticed him to Andrea del Verrocchio, and that was to his studio. And so he was apprenticed to him as a young man to learn how to be an artist. And I think almost across the board, everyone would agree that he exceeded Andrea del Verrocchio's skills, even though Andrea del Verrocchio is certainly an excellent. This is called the Annunciation, and it is that moment when the angel Gabriel comes to the Virgin Mary and says, "You are going to bear the Christ child, and it's going to be a virgin birth." And so it's this holy moment. And the Virgin's gesture is one of surprise. You have the very distinct halo, of which was pretty much signature for Leonardo. Sometimes it's just a very, very fine circle, a very delicate halo. And in the background, you can see a bit of a craggy landscape. Almost looks like the Swiss Alps back there. And this smoky background, this fumato, was actually what Leonardo was quite known for. Now, the cypresses are very, very stylistic, as are the other trees. It's very, very formally arranged. And and it's arranged such that as if it was commissioned to perhaps be over a bed, or again in some sort of intimate environment like that, because of the shape of it. The book itself, which could be the Bible, it could also be the Magnificat. That's basically the words of the Virgin, the Song of the Virgin. It could be a book of hours of the Virgin, and it's actually wrapped in a veil, again like a holy book. You're not even touching it, and so, which of course leads you to believe it's the Bible. But again, other books were considered holy as well. Again, the Magnificat and also the Book of Hours. And the Book of Hours was like a calendar, and it would also have scripture, and again, it was kind of similar to the sort of thing that Christians even use today, where they daily read something from some sort of devotional. It's similar in a way to that, but these would have been extravagantly illustrated. They would have been gilded. They would have been hand done in a scriptorium, usually by monks. But again, these were extraordinarily expensive. And if you indeed had one, you were quite wealthy. So this is considered an early work by Leonardo. So Andrea del Verrocchio actually had Ghirlandaio in his workshop as well. There's a note from Verrocchio directing Leonardo to finish it. The work has some of Verrocchio's brushwork on it as well. So this would have been collaborative. And experts can literally look at the brushwork and tell when there is differentiation, tell when there's another artist hand involved, which astounds me. But again, it's something experts are trained to do. So Verrocchio's David, 1470s. Many scholars, more than some, believe that the face may be a young, very attractive Leonardo. He would have been in his 20s. By all accounts, he was an extremely attractive young man. And again, he would have been around this age. The timing works. So a lot of people do indeed think this is the face of Leonardo. And we don't have that many portraits of Leonardo that indeed are signature or proven authentic with a strong provenance. Provenance is where a painting has been, and it's a record of where it's been. And they get that record from inventories and written documents and receipts and all different types of things. So born in Vinci, 1452. This is his self-portrait, 1512. He's supposedly around 50 here in red chalk. And the painting that you're looking at is one that is suspicious and not likely signature, not likely by Leonardo. Could be a copy. Again, some of the experts dispute this particular work. Nicola Barbatelli, a scholar, discovered a painting in November 2008 in Salerno, exhibited in the Villa Fiorentino. It's tempera, egg tempera on poplar wood. And this depicts the face of Leonardo da Vinci. Not a copy, but is it an original from the turn of the century, 14th century? Now believed a forgery. They find this out from using various techniques, largely dating the wood, dating the paint, dating the materials in the paint. It's really quite complicated. Vitruvian Man, 1490. This drawing depicts a man who is superimposed, basically two men, superimposed on a square and a circle. And it was named after the architect Vitruvius because it accompanied by a text which it's based on the architect's work. And so it was this idea of how can a square fit into a circle, and how can the proportions of man fit into this realm. And so it's essentially almost a landscape of a man in a way, but it's certainly one of the key works by Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo da Vinci, this is indeed believed to be the face of Leonardo da Vinci. That is believed to be have a strong provenance. But again, we don't have many of them. What we do have is a lot of very, very frail drawings. In fact, they're not frequently on display because of their delicacy. I mean, these are over 500 years old, and crumbling into dust is a possibility. So again, they have to be very, very careful. From the soles of the feet to the crown of the head, apply this measure to the horizontally outstretched arms. You will obtain the same breadth and height just as on surfaces that are laid out as squares using mathematical instruments. And this is on Human Proportion, Oxford Art. So symmetry, balance, these were prized by the ancient Greeks and Romans, who, for instance, one sculptor thought the canon of proportions should be basically the head should be 1/8 of the body. Another one said no, it should be 1/7. But again, this canon of proportions was something that was very much discussed during the Greco-Roman period, particularly the Greek period, and it was something that was emulated by the Romans because we have a lot of Roman copies of Greek originals, which means a lot of the Greek originals would have been bronze, and they would have been melted down because of warfare. Art always suffers during war. If they need materials like metals and they happen to be in the art, they will melt them down. Historically speaking, that happens. Monuments get destroyed during wartime. It has certainly happened during our lifetimes as well. So symmetry, balance, the idea of humanism, all of these things are here. So here we have also his studies of the muscles. He was fascinated by the human body, absolutely enthralled with it, and did drawing upon drawing upon drawings of them. And there were literally thousands of anatomical drawings. He dissected cadavers, and he was surprisingly fairly accurate. Not completely, but considering the time frame and considering the period, he was on the right track, let's just say. Certainly, here is an example of drawing of a hand. This is one of the things that art students do. They learn to draw the figure. They learn to draw the figure well. And if you're looking at this going, what language is this written in? He could write mirror image. And it's thought that this was kind of in code. You could kind of journal this way. Why? Probably dyslexic. That is certainly the thought for the most part. Possibly left-handed, so it would be easier because you're not smearing your writing. But again, I think for the most part, the idea that he was dyslexic is certainly in there for the most part. He designed cannons, multi-barreled guns, crossbows. He was very interested in many, many things. That's an understatement. If you ever get an opportunity to go to an exhibition that has his inventions, they're fascinating. I've been to two, where they've actually have wooden models where they have tried to build the things that he envisioned. And surprisingly, they often can be built and they often work successfully or somewhat successfully. So conceptually, he really, really came up with some interesting ideas. I love this. This is perhaps my favorite. But hello, I'm a big time swimmer and kayaker, or if there's water, I'm in it. Leonardo's swimming fins for the hands to help with floating and swimming. This idea is, again, centuries before its time. And he was fascinated by the creatures of the earth. This might have certainly have been inspired by amphibians, you know, that do indeed have this webbing, like frogs. He envisioned air flight. This screw conceptualizes flight centuries before it was developed. Attempted to build a flying machine at least twice that we know of. An illustration of Leonardo da Vinci with the design of one of his flying machines. In 1485, he began to study the flight of birds and later went on to sketch conceptual designs for human flight. This idea of flight fascinated him. Indeed, if he was at a fair and people were selling different wares and he saw somebody who was selling birds, he would, if he had the funds, buy them and then release them. He didn't like to see birds all caged up, which I've kept birds in cages, and I've also have about 25 bird houses in my backyard. I much prefer keeping birds free in my backyard. I've done both. The inside birds are pretty messy, so I'm with them on this point. But I think it's really fascinating, this idea of flight. Vasari wrote he was a kind, thoughtful man, and said he would again regularly do these things. Birds absolutely enthralled him. And here you can see some of his detailed drawings of birds and birds in flight. Again, the one in flight, he doesn't quite have it, but again, you couldn't Google birds in flight and then sketch it. I mean, hello, I can cheat. But he was, doing it just by observation. So his assertion that we are animals and do not have any God-given right to eat our fellow creatures was totally at odds with the time period. Totally different from the culture of his time, who were definitely, especially if they had any means, would have been meat eaters and would have ate like meat and potatoes. And if you had some wealth, produce would be part of it as well. Again, he is believed to have been vegetarian, so which I think is really interesting. Bird wing with mechanical connections, and then also kind of a glider. So this idea of flight absolutely enthralled him. So here's a kind of a blow up of a model of a flying machine similar to a helicopter. Artist is natural scientist. Again, artist, inventor, very accomplished, very admired. Now, one thing that was problematic, he didn't particularly like to finish things. He would get distracted. So in addition to probably having dyslexia, yeah, we're pretty positive he had ADHD because he was so interested in so many different things that he would flip to one activity to another and not always stay focused. And this was problematic when there were commissions that were to be done. But he was such a talented artist that certainly they overlooked some of these tendencies. But they could get very frustrated with him. So during this time, people believed that the shape of your face, your head, features could actually predict behavior, personality, even your intelligence. Leonardo did studies of faces, heads, expressions, emotions. Later drawings are looser, certainly livelier, a little bit more confident. In general, artists, as they get older, their brushwork gets looser, more confident. Some might say less controlled. Again, it depends on how that person is aging. But in general, artist work tends to get looser and more confident as they get older. So there's also a coitus drawing here, which again is actually remarkable for the fact that this is 500 years old. So less than 24 works are supposedly autographed, but again, there's a large number of drawings. Or signature, Leonardo with a proven provenance. But again, there are lots and lots and lots of drawings, journals, and other documents. And even so, over and over and over, there's sometimes a work that is disproven as not autographed or by another artist, because of course, if it is indeed a Leonardo, the value just skyrockets. Leonardo's Unfinished The Musician, Oil on Wood, sometimes called Oil on Panel, and this is at the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana in Milan. Sheet music was not discerned until 1925 after a cleaning, which I think is interesting. So biographers, contemporaries praised his musical skills. Not a composer, but he could play the lyre, the hurdy-gurdy, shown, and the lute, the flute, the bagpipe, the pipe organ, the dulcimer, virginals, and more. So he was a bit of a savant when it came to picking up an instrument and being able to play it. And there are people like that. I have a son-in-law who plays several different instruments. He picks up instruments very, very easily too. But again, it's just amazing. So Jan or Johannes Vermeer, and this is 17th century, Woman at the Virginal. So here you can see an example of a virginal in a quiet interior space. Now this is much later. Cupid has played a card, which is relating to love in some way. Virginity is questionable. She has a very knowing glance, and so that's what the experts think this might mean. Again, a card has been played. Woman, again, at the virginal is also a play on words. Checkerboard floor is signature Vermeer as well. Light source from the left. Almost all of his paintings have that light source from the left. There's a few exceptions, not many. And so that's probably because in his studio, the light source was from the left. But there's also an empty chair that appears to have once been filled. Perhaps she was entertaining a gentleman. Music and love combined. The model is probably his wife or a daughter, probably an older daughter. But yes, and so I love art history. There's just so many implications. Some of it are so subtle. Also the colors of yellow and golds. This is very, very much Dutch, Netherlandish. This is a detail of course, Mona Lisa's hands. Again, if I'm an art historian and don't mention the Mona Lisa at least once, I think people look at me suspiciously. And of course, the enigmatic Mona Lisa's eyes. Who is she looking at? I don't know, I think she's kind of looking at Leonardo. But she might also have been looking at the musicians that were playing for her. They were said to have come and been playing for her and entertaining her. She was a woman of some means, merchant class. And we now pretty sure of her identity. Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, the wife of Francesco del Giocondo. Oil on wood. This is at the Louvre, of course. This is a very, very big deal. It's on a lot of people's bucket list to see. On his deathbed, Leonardo, 67, said, "I have offended God and mankind by not working at my art as I should have." Well, yeah, he had his moments where he took a long time to complete things, but hello, we're still talking about him 500 years later, so I think that's a pretty humble statement. You have that smoky sfumato in the background. You have the light veil over her head, which suggests that she might be pregnant, because again, this was something a young mother-to-be would sometimes wear, is this really soft veil. And her hands, again, I think are just exceptionally beautiful. But I think a lot of people are absolutely enthralled with the expression on her face. She doesn't really have discernible eyebrows and eyelashes, really. And fashion in the 1400s, having a hairline that went way back and very, very light eyebrows like that, it's not uncommon to see in art history. It's said that he carried this painting around with him most of his life, so he had an attachment to it. And I've heard on a few documentaries that she was someone who lived not very far from him. The family lived not very far from him. And so these were people that knew of each other and probably knew of each other for a long time as well. Use of perspective, that's one of the things that's novel and important about this work. It's also much smaller than people think it is. They are surprised that it's smaller when they see it at the Louvre. They expect it to be this large portrait, and done in the grand manner, which is what they call it, and it's not. So through x-rays, originally the hair was in a bun, but the woman with the hair down is not always considered virtuous. However, that light veil helps that problem. Commissioned again by Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo, and again this is believed to be the Mona Lisa, or also known as Lisa Gherardini. So My Lady, Madonna, a little more reverent than Mrs. Vasari mentioned eyebrows, but wait, the Louvre's work does not really have eyebrows. The Singapore Isleworth Mona Lisa may be an earlier example or not. And so this particular work is one that's also disputed. But she has a humanity, a mystique. Is she looking at you? Is she looking at the painter? And that look is similar. The hands are similar. So there are similar things, but the palette, of course, is completely different. And this is a Raphael sketch of the Mona Lisa. So it was not uncommon for artists to sketch important works. And then, of course, when we're looking at this particular work, it really doesn't look like the Mona Lisa that we know of. So again, there's some conjecture that there was more than one copy of the Mona Lisa, which again, if it was a popular subject matter, or maybe that she was a much admired person in the community, many reasons to do more than one copy, so that's possible. So the Switzerland-based Mona Lisa Foundation says historical evidence, other expert opinions, carbon dating point to its authenticity. found in 1913 in a Somerset home of a British aristocrat, maybe an early portrait of a younger Lisa. Kahn, Professor Kemp, Emeritus Professor of the History of Art at Oxford University, which, again, art history, Oxford database, for instance, is one of the ones that I kind of use more than others. So kind of a big deal. The fact it's being shown in Singapore and is not getting an outing in a serious art museum or gallery is significant in itself. Yeah, I think that's true. Again, this one is in dispute. Pascal Cott, another expert, has said that there is an image under the Mona Lisa and she looks different. A revision or another woman. Again, more mystery here. So, but look closely at Raphael's. That is a much closer version than to Raphael's, but still not exact. It's quite the mystery. So some have believed they have discovered why she looks so serene. She'd just given birth to her second son when she set for the painting. Some scholars say her third. The model in the world's most famous work of art is Lisa Gherardini or Giocondo. Experts in Canada have now used special infrared and 3D technology to peer through the layers of glaze and reveal the young woman was again wearing a maternity veil. So this idea of pregnancy in the veil, it's been supported by a few. The term craquelature, it's sometimes spelled differently. I've given you a few of the spellings that are considered acceptable. And this is ceramic glaze or oil painting with natural or deliberate crackle. And indeed, people who produce frauds are pretty good at producing this as well. And so it's problematic, but it does have that craquelature. So stolen 1911, 1913 by disgruntled Louvre worker. Hid it in a broom closet, walked out later. It's, again, not very big. Caught when he tried to sell it. Of course, this is pretty common. A symbol of the art of painting. Again, it was also spoofed, so it was very well known. But once a work becomes stolen, it becomes extremely well known. And that alone puts it out there and usually increases its prestige. Okay. Let's see, oil on wood also. Touched up several times, changing minor details. Leonardo was rarely satisfied. Is it indeed possible he adjusted those eyebrows a little? Certainly. He's tricky. So, and this is Vincenzo Perugia, the man who stole the Mona Lisa and kept it for 2.5 years. He really felt it belonged to Italy, that it should not have been in France. And that was the largest basis for his theft. So 1911, not a lot of security. Employees regularly took the painting down for photos, for study. It was displayed next to a Titian and a Correggio, not by itself. So he'd moved to Paris in the early 1900s. He worked at the Louvre. He was wearing a white smock that all of the employees wore and hid until it closed for the night. The gallery reopened. He walked unobtrusively out with the painting under his smock, attracting no attention, and took it to his lodgings. In 1913, so it's gone a couple of years, he tried to sell it in Italy and was arrested. And by then, I love this, he was going by the name Leonardo Vincenzo. A little bit of delusions of grandeur or something going on here. So he hid it in a trunk for 2 years, took Mona Lisa to Italy. Later, it was exhibited all over Italy and returned to the Louvre in 1913. So, but he claimed to have stolen it out of a patriotic desire to return it to where it should be, Italy. He served a 6-month jail sentence. I don't think that's very long myself. Joined the Italian army, fought in the World War I. He got married and actually moved back to France, and he ran a paint store until he died in 1925. Go figure. And that's from Time magazine. So it has a proven provenance. This is one of the reasons why it's an important work. And it's beautiful. Do I think it's the most important painting in the world? Personally, no, but it is an important work, not even a doubt. And so Leonardo took the painting with him when he was invited to France by King Francis I. He bought it, and after the French Revolution, it was placed in the Louvre. Napoleon took it away to hang in his bedroom, so these eyes have gazed on Napoleon, but it was returned to the Louvre later. So anyway, so provenance is its history, where it's come from, place to place, how long it's been at each location. There was this theory that this was Leonardo dressed as a woman and done as essentially a self-portrait. I don't think so. I really don't. I think sometimes art historians will do almost anything to get published, to get a little attention. Not buying it. But again, you're free to look it up. But no, I don't think so. Lady with an Ermine, also known as Portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, 1490. And so this is Cecilia Gallerani was a court artist to Ludovico il Moro Sforza, and so also his lover. So ermine is a symbol of purity, since ermines don't like to get dirty. So she was Sforza's most important mistress. Not long after it was painted, Ludovico married Beatrice d'Este, and the portrait may have been a thank you gift of sorts for the woman, which is kind of interesting. Her name is reminiscent of the Greek word for ermine, which is gali. So that's one of the reasons for the symbol. He actually used it as one of his symbols or emblems as well. And so there may be dual reasons for the ermine, but I think it's likely that it was one of his symbols. So lots of details here, and some of them are pretty interesting. So again, she was a mistress. She was beautiful, tantalizing eyes, little bits of light that, again, later is something you're going to see in Vermeer's works, just these little dots of white light. Around her neck, she wears a string of jet. Ludovico's name was Il Moro, or the Moor, which refers to his darkness, his dark complexion. And so this may also reference her powerful lover. And so this soft shading, this smokiness, this gradualness of tone, usually when we're talking about that, we're talking about the background, though. So in any case, it's overall, this is pretty accurate. Leonardo was obsessed with movement. He did drawings of rushing water, birds in flight. Portraits before Leonardo came along had been very, very static and stiff and formal. And this has a naturalism to it that's quite different. The way in which she's turning, as if you've just called her name, is very appealing. So the ermine, another name for a stoat, was prized for its soft and silky coat, which was traditionally used to make stoles and ceremonial robes. It appeared in art as an emblem for pregnancy and childbirth, leading art historians to also suggest that she may have been carrying Il Moro's child. Her hands are disproportionately large, elegant, very, very long fingers. Ultramarine was used, which of course is valuable. It would also increase its prestige. So let's see. There are strong erotic overtones. It is tactile, sensuous. The details are rich. You almost want to touch it. So that's in that way, it's very tactile. And let's see, again, it was very, very modern because he's also moving into oil paint after tempera, because tempera was used in the late medieval, early Renaissance. And so he's also moving into oil paint, which would be more realistic, and this has that realism. And let's see, let me move on. Here you can see those beautiful, long, elegant hands, and again, the beautiful detail. And it's really quite remarkable. I love the way he did hands, I have to say that. Albrecht Dürer likely saw this work in Italy. Look at the hands. Look at the gesture of the portrait of Albrecht Dürer. And I will tell you this. Some art experts say Albrecht Dürer, some say Albrecht Dürer. I think I more often hear Albrecht Dürer, so we're going with that. Tomato, tomato. So his self-portrait was produced in 1500, and again, the hands are remarkably similar, certainly like brother and sister might be. He admired Leonardo. It's likely he saw this work. He was exposed to art in Italy, so yeah, I do think it is definitely an allusion to it. And so this is one of Dürer's most famous works. It has the Dürer monogram. It has the central signature. So you're seeing that the status of the artist is moving up. And of course, this is artist as creator, literally artist as creator, because have you noticed he looks a little bit like Jesus? Yeah, that's intentional. So sfumato, smoky quality, diffuse quality, it shows in this work. This is another work that may or may not be Leonardo's work. Numerous glazes create depth, and chiaroscuro, this light dark effect. I think the hands are kind of one of the things that I always look at perhaps closest. The hands, the palette, the touch to it. I don't know. I think it's probably Leonardo, but of course I'm not looking at it close. And again, I'm not a Leonardo expert. I haven't spent my life studying just Leonardo, but I don't know. I think it's autographed. So 1513, considered a late work, oil on wood, high Renaissance. Oh, and he's pointing upward because he's basically saying, not I, but him. You know, he's basically saying, I am the predecessor, but, you know, he is the one. So one of these is believed to be autographed Leonardo da Vinci, and the other is disputed. So look closely, see if you can figure it out. What do you think? I'll give you a little bit of time here, just based on what you've seen. Here, I'll give you a hint. Look at the palette. Have you seen that bright, bright palette? Yeah. The Louvre version, Madonna of the Rocks, this is the one that is believed to be autograph, signature, strong provenance, not likely to be a fake. And so the other one is the one that is questionable. Still, could it be? Yeah, it could. It could just be a different version. It could have been done by followers of Leonardo, people that were closely associated with Leonardo. Maybe the deeper colors was part of the fashion. Who knows? So, Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception commissioned Leonardo to paint the Virgin of the Rocks as part of an altarpiece for its chapel in the Church of San Francisco Grande in Milan. Pyramidal construction, do you see that pyramidal construction of the figures? You're going to see that for centuries in art school. You're going to see that through the 1900s in art schools. This pyramidal construction is very much something that looks back to the masters, looks back to Titian and Raphael and other artists. And then you also have that, that grotto in the background that has this diffused quality as well. Rock formations, nature fascinated him. Vinci overlooks the River Arno where it enters a rocky gorge. The addition of the angel was not traditional at the time. He was being original, innovative. This sometimes got him into trouble because sometimes those experiments didn't work. But you know what? He's always growing, always changing. Strong use of perspective. He's largely credited with moving the idea of a craftsman, we would say craftsperson today, to the idea of the artist. I mean, he was a well-known artist. And hands are expressive. I think that's one of the things he does the very best. Certainly expressions as well. The Virgin represents ideal beauty. She's ethereal, delicate. Again, there's that beautiful smoky background, that pyramidal construction that is classic Renaissance. And again, influential for centuries. This pyramidal construction is something that's taught in traditional schools, certainly academic schools, academic salons. So for centuries, this is a very influential work. The Last Supper. Of course, this is very key work in art history. Even in its own time, after he finished it, it started degrading. He was experimenting with the fresco technique. One of my students wrote a paper and wrote about how they went to visit this particular work at the museum because it was a museum paper. It's like, well, the problem with that is it's a fresco and it's attached to a church wall. Somebody didn't go to the museum anyway. Yes, it's large, it's in a dining hall, and it is got a nice soft palette. What's important about it, what makes it art historical, is it's showing a strong use of perspective. Space goes in. There is a vanishing point behind the Christ figure's head. Again, there's a sense of that room going in. You have 4 triangles of the apostles or the disciples of Christ. And again, they're very distinct, these triangles of the figures. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4, very balanced, symmetrical, Renaissance. Looking back to the classical past, classical features in the background. Again, that soft sfumato in the background. And next to him is, to his right, is John the Evangelist. It is not the Magdalene. There are 12 apostles, okay? It's not the Magdalene. The Da Vinci Code is a fictional movie. This is important. Fictional. No art historian or art professor or whatever of any merit thinks that is real. So anyway, I've probably offended a few of my colleagues. But again, no, that's not the Magdalene. But the figure looks like a woman. It's a beautiful, beautiful figure. The Italian males were often beautiful. John the Evangelist was believed to be beautiful. John the Evangelist was important to Christ. He was at the right hand of Christ. He was the one who was going to take care of Christ's mother after his death. That was one of the things that he was assigned to, essentially. So there's a reason that he's the right hand of Christ, and was known to be very, very beautiful. The Judas figure is actually leaning away from Christ, whereas all the other figures are, for the most part, leaning towards him. Now, John the Evangelist is kind of in a gentle way, moving just slightly away. But Judas is a little bit recoiled. This is the moment that Christ says, one of you are going to betray me. And everyone's like, the hands are going up, me, or no, not I. And this is where he basically is saying, that yes, Peter, you're going to betray me 3 times before the cock crows. And so Judas is the one that does indeed betray him. In his hand, he actually has coins. If you look real close, if I was in a classroom, I'd zoom in really, really close. You could see the bag of coins. And then he literally kind of leaves shortly after that because, of course, he goes and he leads the soldiers to Christ. He has been paid off. Christ knows that. That is Judas's role. That is prophecy. And Judas is one of the reasons why it took him a little long to actually complete this is he kept looking and looking for the person that looked evil enough to be Judas. Remember the whole idea that some figures looked more evil than others? Well, that whole idea, that idea of a particular face of head type looking evil, that was very, very much popular in his time. And so indeed, it took him a while to find that man on the streets that to him looked evil, kind of noisy. So in any case, so it's at the Convent of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan, tempera, gesso on fresco. The patron was Sforza, the Duke of Milan. It's 180 by 315 inches. It is large. It has been a dining hall. It has also housed farm animals. It's been bombed and survived. So dining hall, doorway added, and Christ's feet perished. Can't imagine that decision. Leonardo combs, again, the streets of Milan and even the jails looking for that evil Judas face. It is, of course, one of the most famous artworks in history. If any of you have ever gone to the Pageant of the Masters, and I urge you to go, the Pageant of the Masters often, or it does, it is their tradition to end with this iconic art historical piece. So, Andrew, Judas, Peter, John, Christ, Thomas, doubting Thomas, and then again they're labeled here as well. And here you can actually see the scale. And again, it shows those few seconds after Christ states that one disciple will betray him. And so, again, he wasn't skilled in fresco painting. And so this experimentation with pigment did not work. Many art experts say it is virtually has nothing on it that remains that is signature to Leonardo da Vinci. But the design is there. It has been restored. Of course it's been restored. It has to have been restored. It's 500 years old. So it is dry fresco, also called fresco secco, and it flakes off the walls. So it's basically saving this fresco is important. Huge, huge, huge tourist attraction as well. So here's a list of the rest of them as well. So Bartholomew, James the Minor, Andrew, Judas, Peter, John, Christ, of course, Thomas, James Major, and again, that's not because one's more important than the other, just there's two James. Philip, Matthew, Thaddeus, and Simon. So anyway, when they restored the Last Supper, they found a pinhole near Christ's head used to configure correct linear perspective. The work, again, was begun in 1970 and finished in 1999. So it has indeed been restored, and you can see how that perspective works according to that diagram. It's a great diagram. This, of course, is a detail. It's also interesting how John the Evangelist, the gown and the tunic are essentially a reversal or almost a mirror image of Christ. Francis I, King Francis I and Leonardo, they had a lifelong admiration for Italian culture and arts, which led him to invade it. So he loved classical antiquities, Italian artists like Leonardo, married his son to Catherine de' Medici. The Medicis, of course, were an extremely powerful and important family in Italy. There's a great Medici series on Netflix and also, I think, on YouTube. He acquired the Mona Lisa, persuaded Leonardo to reside in France with him, and from 1516 to 1519, indeed, that's where he was. And this is Clouet's Francis I. I mean, it's just gorgeous, lavish and monumental. He's made to look like his shoulders are broad and powerful. He has the weight of the French world on his shoulders. But in any case, a good friend to Leonardo. Legend says he was at the deathbed of Leonardo, and he died in France with the King of France at his side in 1519 at 67. So really, 67 in this time frame actually was a pretty good age. Really was a pretty good age. Life expectancy, 40s and 50s, you were doing good. It really did not, there was not a long life expectancy. Ingres, death of Leonardo. Ingres, of course, was trained by Jacques-Louis David. Ingres, also pronounced Ang or Ang, neoclassicism, academic painting. Following the death of Giuliano de' Medici, he leaves Italy, goes to France, and he spends his final days there. His hand had become too crippled to paint, and they enjoyed, again, a lot of discussion, discussing architecture, philosophy, engineering, and art. And I mean, you could talk to Leonardo da Vinci, I think, on any subject. He was a true Renaissance man. This, of course, very much demonstrates the admiration the king had for Leonardo, and Ingres has certainly idealized that relationship. You have the priest there kneeling, you have the rich decoration, very, very formal and academically painted, finely painted. This is with a fine brush. This would have been very detailed and taken a long time. I have offended God and mankind because my work didn't reach the quality it should have. I have wasted my hours. We should all offend God so much. I mean, it's amazing to me that that level of humility. He was extraordinarily talented. Might he have achieved more if he worked quicker? I think that's what he's saying, really. But he still was a very, very important artist, and he's certainly a key component of art history.